Happy Thursday, everybody. Thursday evening. Hi, Dolores. Hi, Kay. Hi, Dolores again from YouTube. I see I have a few others here too, but they are unidentified at this point. So I will say hello. So there was an agreement. Hi, Deborah. On the infrastructure bill between a bipartisan group of Republicans and Democrats. Hygo Start and President Joe Biden. There is no bill yet. There is no hard language yet. There are summaries of the agreement that have been handed out to people, to the press. I'm going to go over some articles that summarize the agreement and the immediate reactions of some people to them. Now, before I do that, I want to review one piece of news concerning a warning from Janet Yellen that is worth commenting on. And this piece appeared in the Fiscal Times, and it was written by Michael Rainey on June 23rd, and there's a picture of Janet Yellen right there. And the headline is, Yellen warns debt ceiling failure would be catastrophic, quote unquote. In other words, if the United States defaults on its debt, it would be catastrophic. Now, I'm not sure that's a very bright thing to say. I think a smarter thing to say would have been to warn the Congress that a debt ceiling failure would be illegal because it would be a violation of the 14th Amendment, Section 3, if I recall correctly, which guarantees the debts of the United States. So for Congress not to raise the debt ceiling or completely eliminate the debt ceiling would be a violation of the Constitution by Congress, whose members have taken an oath to uphold the Constitution. That's the first thing, I want to say about this. So instead of saying to Congress, informing them that what some of them are contemplating doing is illegal because it's a violation of the Constitution, she warns them of absolutely catastrophic economic consequences, quote unquote. That's fine. I don't mind her warning them of that. But as somebody from the executive branch of the administration, the first thing she should be warning them about is the legal consequences, that they would be violating the Constitution. Because the language of Amendment 14 is quite plain. A 2-year agreement that has suspended the debt ceiling. Well, really, I got to say something more about this. We've had debt ceiling crisis after debt ceiling crisis now for 10 years, threats of debt ceiling crisis, and not one person has said to Congress people, if you do not stop, the chance of a default, you will be violating Amendment 14. You will be violating the Constitution. It is your obligation to do something by the time the debt ceiling expires. after July 31st. Why is it no one says, Congress, are you preparing to do something illegal? Are you preparing to violate the Constitution? What are you doing? But not to put this whole responsibility on Congress. Continue with the article for a second. A 2-year agreement that has suspended the debt ceiling expires after July 31st, at which point the Treasury would take what it calls extraordinary measures to keep paying the government's bills. In the past, the Treasury's extraordinary measures have provided a cushion of several months. But massive spending on COVID relief programs has muddied the financial picture. Speaking to a Senate subcommittee, Yellen said the government could run out of money at some point in August, possibly when Congress is out of town on its summer recess. Being out of town on your summer recess, Congress, is not an excuse for violating the Constitution. Well, Yellen, of course, said, I believe it would precipitate a financial crisis. It would threaten the jobs and savings of Americans, and at a time when we're still recovering from the COVID pandemic. Well, Secretary Yellen, let me tell you something else that would threaten the jobs of savings in Americans, and at a time when we're still recovering from the COVID pandemic. And that is, if you don't do your constitutional duty, if you don't do everything in your power to avoid a debt ceiling crisis, you say, quote, I would plead with Congress simply to protect the full faith and credit of the United States by acting to raise or suspend the debt limit as soon as possible, unquote. But I have to say, I would plead with you simply to protect the full faith and credit of the United States by acting to mint a $100 trillion coin and deposit it in the Public Enterprise Fund account. And then, using your authority as Treasury Secretary, to sweep the Public Enterprise Fund account of the Mint for the coin seigniorage into the Treasury spending account. So there would be no need for the Treasury to issue any more debt instruments after July 31st. And so the Treasury could also begin to pay the debt down as it falls due, because there would be plenty of money in the Treasury spending account. Now, you're calling on Congress to do its duty. I call on them to do their duty too. But I also call on you to do your duty, which is to do everything in your power, and it is within your authority and your power, to mint platinum coins whose face value is specified at your discretion, not anybody else's. The law says you have the discretion to specify the face value of a 1-ounce platinum coin. You can make that value large enough so there will no longer be any threat of default, because you won't have to issue any more debt instruments. So I call upon you to do that, Secretary Yellen. I don't mind you calling on Congress to do its duty. That's fine. I'll call on them to end the silly debt ceiling law completely. That's fine. I'll call on them to do that. But I'm also calling on you to do your duty. So, next, the infrastructure bills. This is from the Fiscal Times. Deal Exclamation point. Biden senators agree on a $1 trillion infrastructure package. And there is Smokey Joe standing there. To his left, actually to his right, it's his right, it's my left, is Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire. And there's Rob Portman looking very grave and serious. And there's, I keep forgetting this guy's first name. Is it David Cassidy? Anyway, the senator from Louisiana. There's Joe Biden standing in the middle, and I believe Susan Collins standing behind him. Most of her is blocked out, except for a pink dress and her hair. And by Joe Biden's side is Kyrsten Sinema, who saw to it that she stationed herself by his side in kind of a dark rose dress. And there's Joe Manchin just behind her. And Mark Warner, the senator from Virginia, where I live. The senator from Northern Virginia, actually. Former governor of this particular state. That's all you can see in this picture, but there are another 5-10 people in the background here as well. And the vice president not far off, kind of lurking alongside. This is by Yuval Rosenberg, June 24, 2021. President Joe Biden and a bipartisan group of 10 centrist senators announced Thursday they had reached an agreement on a long-sought package to invest hundreds of billions of dollars in the nation's transportation, water, and broadband infrastructure. Yes, 10 centrist senators, 5 from the Democratic side, 5 from the Republican side. That's not enough to pass this bill. They don't plan to do reconciliation for this bill. They're going to pass it through a regular order. They need another 5 senators on the Republican side to come over, assuming all 50 Democrats vote for this bill. Now, the 5 Republican senators who were there at the ceremony include Portman and Cassidy and Susan Collins. And let's see, who else was there? Well, there were 2 others anyway. Mitt Romney. He was certainly the 4th one. And the 5th one was Lisa Murkowski. So 5 of the Republicans, those are the happy 5 who are happy to engage in bipartisanship. They plus the 50 Democrats are not enough to pass this bill. So Biden may have a deal with those 10 centrists, including those 5 Republicans. But as I counted, that's only 55 votes. That's not 60 votes, not enough to break a filibuster. Is Mitch going to allow another 5 of the Republicans to go over? Do the 5 who participated in the bargaining really have another 5 to back them up? If not, then Biden doesn't have a deal. Biden said, "We've all agreed that none of us got what we all would have wanted. I clearly didn't get all I wanted. They gave more than I think they were maybe inclined to give in the first place. The agreement calls for $973 billion in spending over 5 years, or $1.2 trillion if extended to 8 years, according to the White House." I'm not sure quite how that works, but anyway, that includes $579 billion in new spending, with $312 billion for transportation projects, $55 billion for water infrastructure, and $65 billion for broadband, so fast internet presumably can get to most everybody. I hope there's enough money to do that. Quote, today is a huge day for one half of my economic agenda, the American Jobs Plan, Biden later said, adding that the agreement would provide 2/3 of the fiscal infrastructure he called for in his proposal. So he's trying to sell it as a victory. And of course, he's going to say, oh, wasn't it wonderful? If he can get this, he'll say, oh, wasn't it wonderful? I did a bipartisan deal. I got some of the Republicans to come over and be collaborative, okay, and be cooperative. I told you I was going to be a bipartisan president. So anyway, Democrats want a two-part package. Biden and congressional leaders insisted that the bipartisan deal on fiscal infrastructure would only be enacted alongside a broader spending package focused on child care, elder care, and education, areas the administration has termed, quote, human infrastructure, unquote. Dems are preparing to push through those parts of the president's agenda via a process called budget by reconciliation, which would allow them to bypass the need for Republican support. Biden then said, quote, for me, investment in our physical and human infrastructure are inextricably intertwined. He added that he will not sign the bipartisan bill without the broader bill. Quote, if this is the only thing that comes to me, I'm not signing it. It's in tandem. I'm not just signing the bipartisan bill and forgetting about the rest that I proposed. Why should we believe him? He told us in early January we were going to get $2,000 checks. We ended up with only $1,400 checks. He told us at various times during the campaign that he was for a $15 an hour minimum wage. When he had a chance to keep that in the American Rescue Plan, he folded. He asked Chuck Schumer to take it out so Joe Manchin would be happy voting for it. He didn't put the screws to Joe Manchin, keep it in the bill, and force Joe Manchin to vote against the $15 an hour minimum wage. Why not? He promised us he would pass the $15 an hour minimum wage. He didn't do it. He didn't do it. Joe Biden has a long record, not just one that deals with his most recent promises, like, for example, pushing the PRO Act, which is nowhere near approval in Congress right now. Passing H.R. 1 and the John Lewis Act. Neither is anywhere close to passing. In fact, the Voting Rights Act, S1, was defeated only yesterday by the Republicans using the filibuster in the Senate. And Biden has put hardly any pressure on Joe Manchin so far to get him to come over and get rid of the filibuster so H.R. 1 can be passed. So not only does Biden have a long career of breaking promises, he's breaking promises right and left since he took over the presidency. Why should we believe I'm not just signing the bipartisan bill and forgetting about the rest, okay, that I proposed? If this is the only thing that comes to me, I'm not signing it. Why should we believe that? He folds routinely, like a cheap umbrella. Similarly, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said the House would not take up the bipartisan deal until the Senate approves the reconciliation package. Quote, I said there won't be an infrastructure bill unless we have a reconciliation bill. Plain and simple, unquote. She said. Well, I like her language, a little better because she has control. If she says she's not going to take up the bipartisan deal, she doesn't have to take it up. She doesn't have to get it to the floor. She doesn't have to allow it to get to the floor. She can wait. Wait until the Senate approves the reconciliation package. And if they don't do it, if that doesn't get to Biden's desk, then she doesn't have to take it up. And she says she will not take it up. Now, to what extent that's a guarantee that she's made to the progressives, I don't know. But of course, the way she's putting it, if she doesn't follow through on such a guarantee, it's always possible for the progressives to say no to the bipartisan deal. They have enough people to block that bipartisan deal on their own if it ever does come to the floor of the House. The reconciliation package would require the support of all 50 Senate Democrats. Joe Manchin said Thursday he was open to helping craft the bill, but would not commit to supporting it before seeing the details. He said he's concerned about the potential costs and how they would be paid for, or whether they would add to the national debt. So Joe Biden, but tell Manchin, they will not add to the national debt because you're going to order Janet Yellen to mint a platinum coin to pay for the whole bill. I'm just telling that's how it's going to be paid for. So, of course, it's not going to add to the national debt because we're not issuing any debt instruments. Quote, we have to see what's in the other plan before I can say, quote, oh, yes, you vote for this, I'll vote for that, unquote. Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat, West Virginia, told reporters, quote, that's not what I have signed up for, unquote. So Joe Manchin at this point is giving no guarantees. But of course, if Nancy Pelosi is not going to take up the bipartisan deal until the Senate approves the reconciliation package, then it doesn't matter because Joe Manchin is going to get a chance to see the reconciliation package. There's another commitment Joe Biden has to give, by the way, in the middle of all this. Okay, the commitment he has to give is that this time, whatever is in the reconciliation package and whatever Elizabeth McDonough, the parliamentarian, says about what's in the reconciliation package, whatever her opinion about it is, whatever her advice is about it is, the President of the United States and the Vice President of the United States have to commit to voting yes on a bill that 50 Senate Democrats have voted for. If the advice of Elizabeth McDonough is that's not a proper reconciliation bill, it's too bad for her. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have to override her. They have to make a commitment to that, for that effect. No last minute nonsense. Oh, we can't pass the reconciliation bill because the parliamentarian says no. The parliamentarian was not elected to the presidency of the United States or the vice presidency of the United States or the majority leader of the Senate. I think the progressives need that kind of commitment before they can move ahead with anything. Biden acknowledged there's a long road ahead. There's plenty of work ahead to bring this home. There sure is, and other commitments that are needed. The bipartisan deal will need the support of at least 60 senators, and Democrats' two-track strategy faces challenges in both the Senate and the House, where Pelosi leads a narrow and divided majority. And she better keep that in mind. It is a divided majority. Bipartisan deal includes $73 billion for the electric grid and clean energy, for example, far short of what some on the left say is needed. Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut called the deal, quote, way too small, paltry, pathetic, unquote. He adds that he needs, quote again, a clear, ironclad assurance that there will be a really adequate, robust package. By the way, such a package ought to include the $15 an hour minimum wage provision this time around. But Biden threw his full support behind the agreement, even as he acknowledged some members of his own party wouldn't be satisfied with the details. He's betting that progressives will back him in his deal. Quote, my party is divided, but my party is also rational. They can't get every single thing they want, but all that they have in the bill before them is good. Are they going to vote no? I don't think so. Folks, vote no if that reconciliation bill is not forthcoming and doesn't have the good stuff that you guys want, including much more energy infrastructure stuff, because this was paltry and too small. Senator Bernie Sanders, who's developing the reconciliation bill as chair of the Budget Committee in the Senate, had floated a package as much as $6 trillion, but said he's prepared to reduce the size of the bill to avoid overlap with the bipartisan deal. Now, that's a handsome offer, and secure the needed Democratic votes. Quote, if the bipartisan bill is passed, we're certainly not going to build the same bridge twice, so we can deduct some of what they have passed from the reconciliation, Sanders said to reporters. Still, the two-track Democratic strategy could also risk losing some votes for the bipartisan deal from Republicans who object to the larger package. So the 5 Republicans in that bipartisan group better have another 5 Republicans on the hook who are going to join them. Perhaps Senator Cassidy has the other Louisiana senator who will back him, specifically John Kennedy. Have you got John Kennedy in your back pocket, Senator Cassidy? And Republicans may have other concerns about the agreement as well, including its reliance on stepped-up enforcement by the IRS, a key element of its proposed funding. We'll get back to that, a little later. Anyway, this is also about China, because we're in a race with China, and the president is saying this is a critical step in the race with China. Biden says, let me be clear, neither side got everything they wanted in this deal. That's what it means to compromise. It reflects something important. It reflects consensus. The heart of democracy requires consensus. There is consensus. There's consensus among the public that your original plan, your original infrastructure plan, the American Jobs Plan, had broad support among the American people, consensus support. Democracy doesn't require consensus in the Senate, Mr. Biden. It's a very good thing if it has consensus among the public. But if you don't have consensus in the Senate, it's your responsibility to pass what the public wants, what its consensus is, without requiring that there be a consensus in the Senate. The heart of democracy doesn't require a consensus in the United States Senate. I'm sorry to have to tell you that, but that's the truth. Next, a Common Dreams piece on this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the Common Dreams piece, except where it differs with the Fiscal Times piece. The reactions were, I'll skip the amounts because you already heard them. Senator Portman said the blueprint will not include any new taxes. And their summary is financing the plan by repurposing unspent unemployment insurance funds, those were from COVID, reduce tax gap, and utilizing public-private partnerships and asset recycling. I don't know about repurposing the unemployment insurance funds from COVID because the Delta variant is here in the United States now. And various people are predicting that it will be the dominant strain here by the beginning of August. By the beginning of August, when you hope to pass this bill. If any parts of the country require shutdowns due to the Delta variant, and by the way, it's going to be those red Republican states that are going to be most vulnerable to the Delta variant because they haven't been vaccinating. They haven't been vaccinating. Their populations are going to be much more vulnerable to the Delta variant. Cases are going to shoot up in those states, and deaths will start increasing too. And there may be a need for shutdowns. Governor DeSantis notwithstanding, Governor Abbott notwithstanding. States like California will probably be fine because they vaccinated. New York vaccinated. Virginia vaccinated. But all those red states down there, I don't know about them. They don't seem to be vaccinating. Maybe there are going to be shutdowns there, and maybe those states are going to need unemployment insurance funds. Yes, the governors have already said, and have already in some cases cut off the unemployment insurance money to their people. There's going to be an awful big demand, probably in the streets, for the restoration of those funds if the COVID situation gets serious. Reducing the IRS tax gap, that means the gap between what the IRS should be able to collect and what it is able to collect. And utilizing public-private partnerships and asset recycling. We'll have more to say about that later. However, progressive advocacy groups have warned that the latter two pay-fors would hand public infrastructure over to corporations and Wall Street investors. In other words, another giveaway to Wall Street. That's what we need, right? We must do more, says Ocasio-Cortez, as Biden announces bipartisan infrastructure deal. This is from Common Dreams. Jake Johnson, June 24th, 2021. It was as of this afternoon, soon after the announcement was made. Anyway, Ron Wyden doesn't like it. I'm not willing to support throwing climate overboard, he said. Ocasio-Cortez, of course, is calling for more. Jamal Rad, executive director of Evergreen Action, said the bipartisan deal, quote, nowhere near meets the scale, scope of the climate crisis. And but Nancy Pelosi told reporters lower chamber will not vote on bipartisan infrastructure legislation till the Senate also passes a reconciliation bill. containing Democratic priorities that were excluded from the compromise measure, including spending on safety net programs, green energy, and more. And Bernie Sanders and Chuck Schumer are currently working on a $6 trillion reconciliation package. You've heard that before. And Jennifer Schutt said to Speaker Pelosi, "We will not take up a bill in the House," quoting Speaker Pelosi, "will not take up a bill in the House till the Senate passes the bipartisan bill and the reconciliation bill. There is no bipartisan bill, then we'll just go when the Senate passes a reconciliation bill." In a series of tweets following the release of the new infrastructure framework, Ocasio-Cortez declared the bipartisan package alone isn't acceptable, quote unquote. "The exclusion and denial of our communities is what D.C. bipartisan deals require," the New York Democrat wrote. "That's how you get the GOP on board. Don't do much for the working class and low income or women or people of color communities or unions, etc. We must do more." So Biden has expressed support for the two-track approach, as we learned from the Fiscal Times article. And so that's all I'm going to do with this article. I do want to highlight something which appeared on Twitter, and thanks to Lana Dell for alerting me to this afternoon. There was a tweet by Jeff Stein. Let me share that. Let me make sure you're getting it. I guess you are getting it. Let me give you the whole screen here so you can see it better. There you go. And so Jeff Stein said, an OK source confirming main pay-fors in the bill. $100 billion net from IRS enforcement. That's for supporting $40 billion in new spending. $100 billion in public-private partnerships. $80 billion unemployment insurance program integrity. Not sure what that means, but they expect to get $80 billion from that. $65 billion in spectrum sales. I'm not sure what that is. $60 billion they expect to gain by doing dynamic scoring of the bill, something which the CBO doesn't like to do. By the way, $30 billion in toll credits. Also, by the way, that $40 billion is the figure that CBO thinks will be netted, from IRS enforcement. There's no indication that CBO is going to agree to the $100 billion net, or even to more. In fact, if CBO were to agree to a likely net from IRS enforcement, it could pay for all the new spending, because that spending is supposed to be $579 billion, and supposedly they should be able to recoup $70 billion if they only do IRS enforcement. So, they're telling us they let $700 billion a year get through lack of enforcement. Isn't that outrageous? Isn't that just outrageous? Anyway, $30 billion in toll credits. I guess they're going to make that from toll roads. And $25 billion in recouped unemployment insurance ARP supplement. That's from the American Rescue Plan. There was a supplement, and they expect to get back $25 billion in that, because the Republican governors are cutting off the unemployment insurance early. to various states. And Jake Sherman tweeted something about this. He's from the Punch Bowl. And Jeff Stein says that is correct. And he says, and important to keep in mind here, no legislative text as of now, and no CBO score. This is the world as the negotiators see it. That is, it's not the real world. It's the world as the negotiators actually see it. Let me see if there's any more to this thread since I looked at it last time. See what anybody else has to say. And you can see some reactions there. I'm not going to go through the reactions at this point. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but those are the pay-fors they dreamed up so they wouldn't have to tax the rich or tax people. In other words, Biden didn't want to pay for things with a gas tax, and the Republicans didn't want to pay for things with taxes on the rich. So they try to invent some pay-fors out of whole cloth. Why didn't they just mint the platinum coin to cover the $579 billion? Then there wouldn't have been any need for new taxes or for any other pay-fors or for any other pretense. Uh-oh, Steve, glad to see you here. But please, not Epstein again. Not Epstein. Steve's got a regular litany tonight. Okay, so there are a couple of pieces that are relevant here from Dave Dayen. First, bipartisan infrastructure plan could come down to one number. And what does he mean by that? He wrote this actually before the announcement. A key meeting today will determine the fate of the $579 billion Gang of 21 infrastructure package. Okay, now, of course, as we said, based on the Fiscal Times article, it's really somewhere between $973 billion and $1.2 trillion, depending on whether it goes for 5 years or goes for 8 years. There was no information about what was to determine whether it was going to go for 8 years. But people seem to agree that the new spending in it is the $579 billion. So that's why Dave is referring to it as $579 billion. Gang of 21 infrastructure package. So supposedly there are 21 senators in back of this, and not just the 10 who are out there with the president today. With the proposed spending in the bill, all part of President Biden's American Jobs Plan, and with even Joe Manchin warming to a second reconciliation bill for social spending, the main question standing in the way of a deal is the mix of revenue offsets. Okay, so you notice he says revenue offsets. He's using the MMT term. He doesn't want to talk about the tax revenues, paying for things, because he knows better than that. The 2-page fact sheet on the bill laid out 11 possible revenue raisers, and the Biden administration has all but rejected most of them. Thankfully, that includes most of the privatization schemes that would have been actively harmful to Biden's agenda. But the Fiscal Times said, the Common Dream said, that there was going to be privatization in it. So what's going on? We haven't really seen details yet. Then is asset recycling. The idea of of inducing localities to sell off old infrastructure in favor of new infrastructure was immediately rejected. But it said in the Common Dreams piece they were going to do asset recycling, didn't it? So-called direct pay bonds issued by cities were also set aside. Public-private partnerships did not immediately get that treatment. There's an existing program called the Transportation Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act. That's essentially a P3 for transportation. I guess, I don't know if a P3 is like a P4. I'm not. Oh, a P3, a public-private partnership, for transportation. It has little demand as investors seek better opportunities. But you can see an expansion of TIFIA into clean energy as a way to get climate mitigation measures into the bill. And Dave says, I think that's probably too cute by half. Investor-owned by utilities do not have a great track record with clean tech. And it's just getting private investment for solar and wind farms. You could imagine how that filters down to ratepayers in the form of higher energy prices. It's also unclear whether Republicans would allow clean energy public-private partnerships into the bill. Other measures like deploying unused COVID relief funds, the Biden administration insists there aren't many, or raising user fees like the gas tax or a levy on electric vehicles are also off the table. According to Senator John Thune, who's the Republican whip, the White House rejected the bill's conception of an infrastructure bank, which would leverage a small capital base to lend out for projects. There are good and bad versions of that concept, and some of the good versions have been circulated by the American Prospect. And Dave says they're good and bad versions of that concept, and it wouldn't surprise me if the bipartisan version was in some way bad. In one sense, there's a simple answer for this. Don't, quote, pay, unquote, for infrastructure. Interest rates are incredibly low, and improving America's built environments pays real dividends, not only in the jobs needed to construct, but in increased productivity and efficiency. That something that sensible runs into the promises of Biden to offset all the spending in his plans and the predilections of centrists to do the same. So one way or another, it's likely that this $579 billion will need to be covered. Well, if it is covered, it should only be covered over our screaming bodies, because they should be minting a platinum coin to cover that. Or they should be doing overt congressional financing to cover that. Why let them get away with assuming that they have to find their usual idiot pay-fors so as to make it seem there's no deficit being run? Let them do deficit spending and get the increased funds through either OCF or minting the coin. Let that be done, for God's sake, already. Let's stop pretending the federal government has no money. That's BS. There's really only one part of the revenue package the White House truly finds intriguing: reducing the IRS tax gap. Means investing in enforcement. Biden wants to spend $80 billion on enforcement. How much he got there, I don't know. The bipartisan group has proposed $40 billion in enforcement spending over a 10-year period. The Biden proposal was for $80 billion. But the bigger issue involves the perception of how much money that investment would raise. CBO, by rule, cannot view enforcement measures as producing revenue. and change the goddamn rule. They can change the rule. If they got a bipartisan majority in back of this particular bill, then they can use the same 60 votes to get rid of that rule. So they can use enforcement measures. There are ways to get the office to score minor savings, but the rule severely limits this. A report that CBO put out last year estimated $40 billion in tax enforcement would yield just $63 billion in revenue on net. By contrast, the Treasury Department estimated that its $80 billion investment would bring back $700 billion. Who do you suppose is right? I'm betting on the Treasury Department. They know how much they could bring in with a certain amount of enforcement. Of course, the wealthy would probably be screaming like stuck pigs. That's a huge gap within the tax gap. If this was destined for budget reconciliation, would be a real problem. CBO score predominates because the purpose of reconciliation is to hit a particular budget number, and you need some scorekeeper to set those numbers out. But in the bipartisan bill, the two sides could just agree that tax enforcement would yield a certain threshold, of revenue. But while you're at that, why don't you just change the rule so CBO doesn't have that problem anymore? And in theory, going by Treasury's numbers, that revenue could get you the entire way to offsetting the $579 billion. Isn't that a great common sense suggestion by Dave Dayen? It is to me. So far, Republicans and the Gang of 21 are sticking to the CBO number. As long as they do so, the revenue side is going to come up very short. But moderate Democrats have begun to see enforcement as a bigger revenue raiser. I think there's lots of documentation on the tax issue, Mark Warner said. The more you put into the IRS, the better enforcement. That number could go as high as $700 billion. Anyway, there's more, but you're getting the picture. So Dave had that to say about it. Now, next, he had another thing significant to say, which was actually earlier. Bipartisan Senate infrastructure plan is a stalking horse for privatization. Now, he said that on June 21st, 2021. What he did here is that he warned that a public-private partnership could well be one essentially passing to privatization. But the really scary piece is labeled, quote, public-private partnerships, private activity bonds, and asset recycling. According to Common Dreams, they passed that. Okay, but according to Dave, just before the bill was passed, they weren't going to pass that. So what did they, in fact, actually pass? In the name of building world-class infrastructure, these lawmakers would sell it off in fire sales to private financiers. We have lots of experience with infrastructure privatization that strongly suggests it should be avoided. There was a time when Democrats did oppose such schemes. It was during the Trump administration. To the extent Trump had an infrastructure vision, it was rooted in privatization. Wilbur Ross and Peter Navarro, who would each take high-level jobs in the Trump administration, wrote a paper before the 2016 election outlining their vision. $1 trillion in infrastructure. I'm sorry, I'm not sharing this for you, and I should do that. So give me a second. We're actually almost done with it already, but let me share it anyway so you can see it. Anyway, they wrote a paper before the 2016 election outlining their vision: 1 trillion in investment, provided by private bond buyers who would be guaranteed a tax credit to buy the bond, interest on the debt, and an equity stake with dividends with up to a 10% profit margin. It adds the usual song and dance about how private enterprise is so much more efficient than the public sector, therefore saving money overall. We know that that's not true. Dave says, it takes about 2 seconds to recognize how ridiculous this is. The government doesn't require a 10% margin on equity, tax credits, and interest payments. That's a layer of profit that gets built into the expenditures. Governments usually contract out design and construction to private contractors. But there are only 2 ways for these companies to reduce ownership and operation costs lower than what the public sector would spend while still being profitable. They can cut back either on safety or labor or maintenance, or they can extract a lot of profit from users of the infrastructure. Think toll roads. If the infrastructure isn't inherently profitable, like a bridge in New York City or a toll road in Southern California might be, the upgrade probably won't get built. Democrats rightly and loudly objected to giving up public assets to private investors at that time. So hopefully they're doing the same here, but that remains to be seen. But let's call attention to the third item on that list: asset recycling. This is an idea imported from Australia, which is really just an enormous shell game. It involves selling off public infrastructure to acquire the resources to build new infrastructure. It's literally robbing Peter to pay Paul. Naturally, the Trump administration was enthusiastic about it, though they never passed any legislation on it. That's fallen to this bipartisan group. Asset recycling didn't work in Australia, mind you. States and territories were offered a 15% subsidy to rapidly sell off their existing assets. Some of the resulting deals included the Northern Territory in Australia selling the Darwin port to a Chinese firm for 99 years without even having another infrastructure project ready to spend the money on. These fire sales underpriced the assets, and the proceeds were rushed into unsound new projects, largely based on what powerful politicians wanted rather than what the public actually needed. So this is the kind of baloney that we're facing now, depending on what was involved in these particular pay-fors. I'm sure Biden has no concept of what Dave Dayen was talking about here. So let's get on now. There's a lot more to cover. I'm just trying to give you here some knowledge about the full range of problems that we'll have to face in this, that the public will have to face, that the public will have to watch out for. By refusing to tax the rich, the GOP set the terms of the bipartisan infrastructure debate. Yes, the Gang of 21. Looks like there's more of the Gang of 21 there than were out front. Looks like some other people in the background. Senators Bill Cassidy, it's Bill Cassidy, Kyrsten Sinema, Lisa Murkowski, and Mitt Romney hold a bipartisan meeting on infrastructure. There's Sinema, there's Romney, there's Lisa Murkowski, and Bill Cassidy, and Mark Warner. That's the back of his head. That's the back of either Jeanne Shaheen. I think it's Jeanne Shaheen's head there, rather than Susan Collins. Anyway, Mike Ludwig of Truth Out did this on June 22nd. Between the two camps, that is the Democrats and the Republicans, Conservative Democrats such as Senators Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona say Congress should reach a bipartisan compromise on infrastructure, despite the GOP's staunch opposition to taxing the wealthy, which left the negotiators with dwindling options for financing the plan. Meanwhile, and one option that they wouldn't even try to, two options they wouldn't even try to take account of: overt congressional financing of the plan and minting the coin in order to finance the plan. They just didn't think of those things. Meanwhile, Democrats are working on their own $6 trillion bill that would allow for tax hikes on corporations. So Republicans have said for months they would never support Joe Biden's original proposal for modest tax hikes on corporations and the wealthy, and they didn't. They made it stick. Quote, the logic of having the rich pay for it is both that they have been the big gainers in the economy the last 4 decades, and also they just got a tax break in 2017, unquote, said Dean Baker. Of course, we know that the rich can pay for it, not through taxes, because tax revenue doesn't really pay for anything. Dean Baker refuses to acknowledge that, even though the argument is crystal clear in Stephanie Kelton's 1998 paper. I mean, I don't know how long she has to wait for the truths in that paper to be widely acknowledged. It's been 24 years already. Is it too much for Dean Baker to read that paper? Quote, it's hard to argue they would be suffering some great injustice if Biden were to reverse some or all of the 2017 tax cut for the rich, unquote. He's right about that. It's not the pay-fors that we're talking about here. It's the offsets we're talking about, and their insistence on having offsets when they do not need to have the offsets. So I just wanted to make the central point, okay, of this article, and that is that the terms of the bipartisan bill were set by the Republicans' absolute refusal to consider taxation of the wealthy or taxation of the corporations before this. And I want you to be very aware of that particular point. So now here we go to the next post, which is actually a fairly old post, but very relevant to the context of what is going on now. This is an article by Mark Paul and Daniel Aldana Cohn. Paul is an assistant professor of economics at New College of Florida, and Dan Cohn is an assistant professor of sociology at the University of Pennsylvania, where he directs the Socio-Spatial Climate Collaborative, or SC2. Okay, Mark Paul is assistant professor of economics at the New College, of Florida. Okay, this is really a good article. I don't have time to go through the whole thing, but the main point is the Green New Deal's public infrastructure should be funded by the public. Why? Because to move green investment plans anywhere near a Green New Deal and avoid ceding power to Wall Street will require a political mobilization from the bottom up. The date of this article was September 21st, 2020, and it was from Dissent, that old magazine that's still there and still publishing some useful articles from time to time. And this was one of them. They point out, if Biden wins, how would he actually deliver the levels of investment needed to rapidly decarbonize and tackle the inequalities of race and class? To build toward anything like a Green New Deal, we're going to need a strategy to deliver the massive investments essential to transforming communities across the country. Policymakers and policy thinkers and organizers are mulling a number of new institutions, from narrow federal green bank proposals to more ambitious assemblages. Everyone is looking for ways to bring in additional private investment, to ramp up public investment, or both. Behind the charts and jargon are massive questions of economic and political power. Who will foot the bill for the needed investment? Public agencies that are at least somewhat accountable to democratic politics and grassroots mobilization, or private companies lured into green investment by the potential for profit and power. And if most likely it's going to be a mix of public and private, on which terms will the sectors cooperate? Those are really the central questions. And they say this is not the time to leave the economy to a handful of economists and bankers. If there ever were a time to advance bold, clear proposals to solve giant problems with hugely ambitious policies, this is our moment. And yet, progressives have to acknowledge the realities of the mixed U.S. economy. Decarbonization will require both public and private investments, but the exact mix is up for grabs. A century ago, John Maynard Keynes was convinced that for advanced economies to support full employment, the, quote, comprehensive socialization of investment unquote, was required. Today, we could start by greatly expanding the public sector's role in engaging and directing private capital. That was done during the Second World War, and quotes a paper that was done by, it was a working paper done by the World War II working paper done by the Roosevelt Institute. It may have been a paper of his. There's also a paper from Levy by Randy Ray, and Yever Nersessian concerning how we can pay for the Green New Deal based on the model of how we paid for the Second World War. The alternative, which is creeping into seemingly progressive proposals, is to keep public spending in check while using partnerships that leverage private money for ostensibly public benefit. In this particular scenario, the public would have to ensure private investors made a profit on all their investments, potentially distorting progressive policy objectives well beyond any recognition. The metaphor of leveraging private dollars may sound sensible. It seems a tempting strategy, but it has a troubled history, both in the United States and in the UK. Time and again, private investors were exceedingly talented in ensuring their returns, typically at the cost of the public sector in general, and working class and racialized communities in particular. Does anyone really believe that bankers and frontline environmental justice organizers will be able to agree on investments that will both offer serious repair and stable private sector returns? Then we go into a proposal from Soleil T. Omarova, who's outlined a plan for a national investment authority. Omarova's plan builds on earlier work on the topic done in partnership with a colleague at Cornell, Robert Hockett, or Bob Hockett. And we went over Hockett's ideas here and Omarova's ideas too, but previously, some months ago. The ideas have been getting a lot of attention from the left and received fairly positive receptions, or reviews. It promises an economy-wide shift to clean energy and sustainable growth. Omarova tells us the NIA, the National Investment Authority, will operate as a permanent capital bank for the Green New Deal through new public-private cooperation in the arena of infrastructure finance. And they go into more detail about what's involved here. I think it's a pretty fair summary, of Omarova's particular proposal. Uh, a part of which is for the public sector to hold equity in the terms. Okay, it jumpstarts it's a pretty fair summary of Omarova's ideas. And the National Investment Authority would go by the name, of Nikki Mack. Says in the article, behind but these proposals is the idea that the primary obstacle to decarbonization is a lack of focused investment. And it says, that Nikki Mack would overcome this by using public funds and government-backed investment vehicles to, quote, crowd in, unquote, larger flows of private finance to help, quote, commercially unprofitable projects like toll-free roads, adult education centers, or public parks, unquote. In other words, Nikki Mack would ask the private sector to invest in nonprofit infrastructure investments in what we believe to be an unprecedented move. It would pay back private capital for these investments by giving them a share of expected economic growth, perhaps in the form of dividends. Overall, the various components of the proposed NIA would create a new form of public-private partnership in which the public leads and private capital follows. So, the central point, of the article is that if one doesn't have the popular support to make wildly popular green investments, then one won't have the political support to set up an institution to channel private funds with administrators who share the politics of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. Instead, a political context of elite brokering and low mobilization in politics would likely yield more of what we have now, an NIA run by people with the politics of Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, former Treasury Secretary, or Obama's Wall Street loaned technocrats who would govern the NIA with near total deference to the finance sector and other large investors. I think this is a critical objection to Bob's ideas and to Solei's ideas. This is the problem. Who would be running, the NIA? Who are the elites who are going to be running it? And how can we ensure that they share the politics? They share the politics of Green New Dealers, in general. There is no way. It might start off in that way. That might last for 4 years, or 8 years. But then the Republicans come in, and all of a sudden, you've got a whole bunch of people who are running the NIA who want to milk it, who want to loot, especially if people like Trump come back. But generally, in general, Republicans are like that. I mean, they've shown it. It wasn't only just in the Trump administration. If, on the other hand, we progressives are going to put up a big fight for the needed investment, as we hope is going to occur, why not then fight directly for making spending on nonprofit, shared goods a public investment? Simply ramping up spending is also a lot easier to understand, than Nikki Mack's complex accountability mechanism. Simplicity of policy design would help both in executing the project and selling it to the general public. Support for massive public investment is already high. Even policies like public investment in electric buses enjoy greater support than opposition among enjoy greater support, than opposition among Republican voters. Beyond these political considerations, the notion that the public sector itself cannot finance the public infrastructure needed for a GND or a broader social investment is simply incorrect. As we've argued elsewhere, financing the public side of the investment should take place through regular deficit spending. The additional deficit spending amounts to a feature, not a bug, under current macroeconomic conditions. Well, Mark Paul, not only under current macroeconomic conditions, under any macroeconomic conditions, because the deficit spending can always be funded through overt congressional financing, or using 1 ounce the platinum coins. We have to stop not making those suggestions. If progressives really want to ensure that we have deficit spending and that public investments are owned by the public, we have to quit trying to view this in terms of macroeconomic conditions that are favorable to borrowing, at low cost. Those conditions may not last forever, but what will last forever is the ability of Congress to do overt congressional financing, and according to current law, the ability of the Treasury Department to mint those platinum coins. So I think I've covered the essence of this. This is a very good article. I commend it to you. You should read the whole thing yourself. The objections are pretty decisive, but to the National Investment Authority idea, I think at least that idea has to be refined very, very carefully, by Bob Hackett and by Soleil as well. So now going back to yet another article. A lot of things to cover tonight. But this won't be in detail either. Here was Politico's inside. Dems stuck in dual traffic jams on their 2-track infrastructure strategy. This is by Laura Barron Lopez and Sarah Ferris on June 22nd. And it was done for Politico, of course. President Joe Biden still trying to have it all, an infrastructure deal with the GOP and a sprawling spending package for his own party. It's just not clear how much longer the strategy will hold. Well, Biden seems to have made a deal. So for the time being, it's holding. But of course, as that tweet happened to make it clear, that I went over, just a little while ago, we don't know what the fine print will say yet, because the agreement is just an overview of things. It still has to be translated into legislation, into the language of bills. And we don't know whether that particular legislation is going to hold in all the members of the gang of 21 who say they're aboard for a bipartisan bill. It's encouraging, though, it's encouraging that people like Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii have said, quote, "We've made our position clear that the possibility of a bipartisan deal depends on a commitment to move forward with respect to reconciliation." He said that on Tuesday. But now people are saying that it's going to depend on having a reconciliation bill that passes the Senate, that the bipartisan deal won't pass the House until the reconciliation deal actually passes the Senate. Supposedly, the broad framework has won support from 11 Republicans. 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 11 but remain short of critical details on how to pay for an infrastructure plan. Now, we saw the information in that tweet on how it would be paid for, but part of it is going to be paid for, okay, by people agreeing that the tax gap will cover 100 billion of it. We don't know whether that agreement, okay, is going to hold. And we know that if CBO scores the bill, okay, that CBO is going to give only 40 billion worth of credit for it. Anyway, John Thune, who's the whip for the Republicans, has said, quote, it's gotten more complicated with the pay-fors. There's a number of things they ruled out previously, and there's even a bigger hole now. Okay, there's a lot of detail here that is not actually relevant now, since they seem to have come to agreement. On June 22nd, there was even a thought that we could be going into the August recess with these negotiations, but evidently not. The agreement was today. It's not even July yet. So they seem to want a deal. They want to push something forward. Why do they want to? Because they want to demonstrate that bipartisan deals are still possible in this particular Senate. Why? Because they don't want the filibuster to be actually removed. They don't want to create a situation where the country at large demands the repeal of the filibuster. And to forestall that, they have to show that they can do bipartisan deals. And in fact, Senator Jerry Moran, okay, Republican of Kansas, who's part of the talk, said a deal between the parties would likely result in, quote, reduced pressure, unquote, for Democrats to act on more of their agenda through reconciliation or by nixing the Senate's filibuster, which is a move they don't have the votes for. At least right now, they don't have the votes for. But the fear was that the pressure would build up too heavily on Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, and that pressure would cause them to fold. That's one of the reasons why the Republicans came to the table to pass this particular bipartisan bill. As paltry as it is, they only came to the table for fear that if they did not, the filibuster would be going. So Bernie had something interesting to say about this. Quote, in my view, we should be paying for all the ongoing programs, the expansion of health care, the child tax credit, the expansion of Medicare to cover dental, and so forth. Because Bernie intends to include in the $6 trillion bill the expansion of Medicare that he and Jayapal have been talking about to 60, okay, and over, with dental, okay, and vision, and I forget what else is included in there. There's also a third item of expansion. So an expanded version, okay, of Medicare for all to cover people 60, okay, and over, and that's going to be part of the reconciliation bill that Bernie is going to put forward. And let's hope he's not going to cave in this time when Joe Biden says, hey, I don't want that, and Chuck Schumer says, I'm going to take it out of the bill before it hits the floor. At that point, I think Bernie and the progressives in the Senate and the progressives in the House are all going to have to say one loud no. That belongs in there. It's going to be in the reconciliation bill, and by God, it's going to pass. And Brian Schatz was telling the White House, I am encouraging them to deficit finance any capital expense. The idea of paying cash for construction is absurd, and there's a reason that no one does that. And Bernie Sanders says, what I don't think we have to pay for is the one-time infrastructure improvements that we're going to spend a lot of money on, unquote. So Bernie is saying we don't have to pay for that. But of course, if Bernie is constructing a reconciliation bill, then they are going to have to pay for it because reconciliation bills have to be deficit neutral. So I don't know how Bernie squares that particular circle, but we will see. We will see. And now, one other voice was heard from. And we're going to share that because it may be important. So Senator Warren came out flat today. And there she is. Speaking to reporters prior to a vote on June 22nd, 2021. Headline, this is from Common Dreams. Quote, it's one deal. Warren says she won't vote for a bipartisan infrastructure plan without climate and child care. It's by Jake Johnson, June 24th, today. Elizabeth Warren made clear late Wednesday she's not going to go along with the newly announced bipartisan infrastructure framework unless the Democratic leadership simultaneously presses ahead with a legislative package that includes child care, also major investments in green energy, and other progressive priorities that are excluded from the emerging deal with the Republicans. Quote, they may be voted separately, but it is one infrastructure deal. I can't vote. She said this, by the way, on MSNBC. I can't vote for some small subset that, the infrastructure train leaves the station and child care gets left on the platform. Green energy gets left on the platform, unquote. It's that all of the pieces have to move because ultimately it's one deal, added the Massachusetts Democrat, who also cited tax hikes on the wealthy as a necessary component of any infrastructure agreement. And she said this to Maddow. So by the way, the court has ruled, I guess the Supreme Court in this case, has ruled that Rachel Maddow's program isn't really a news program, but just an entertainment program. So does that mean that Warren's statement today wasn't authentic because she was making it on an entertainment program? I don't know. I don't really mean to suggest that. But I find it interesting that she was defended in court by lawyers who were claiming that the program Rachel Maddow was running was an entertainment program, and not a news program. Well, I'm sorry. This program is a news program. It's not an entertainment program, whether or not you're entertained. Warren's comments came just as a bipartisan group of senators, led by Senator Portman of Ohio and Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, announced a tentative deal with White House aides on an infrastructure blueprint calling for $559 billion in new spending over the next 5 years. $559 billion? I thought it was $579 billion in new spending over the next 5 years. Isn't that what we read in those other two articles? So nobody knows exactly what it is yet. A package far smaller than President Biden's original $2.2 trillion American Jobs Plan. Well, Biden is going to reply and he's going to say, no, that's not right. If we do it for 8 years, it's going to be $1.2 trillion. So I got more than half of what I wanted. So I negotiated a lot better than Obama used to negotiate. He'll probably be saying that to us. So is there more in this that's important? What's important is that there was a flat statement, okay, by Warren saying she's going to vote against this if we don't have a situation where the reconciliation bill is getting passed at the same time. She's insisting that it's one deal. It's important that she insists, okay, it's one deal. Okay, because if she doesn't get the vote for a reconciliation bill that's satisfactory to her, that reconciliation bill will not pass because it takes only one Democrat, okay, to defeat it. But you can be sure Jeff Merkley and Bernie Sanders, okay, and Ed Markey and a number of others are probably going to be with her. So in other words, if the reconciliation bill doesn't pass the Senate, there's going to be no bipartisan infrastructure bill. I think this time that's going to hold because too many people are saying that. And here's a quote from Chuck Schumer. We can't get the bipartisan bill done unless we're sure we're getting the budget reconciliation bill done, said Schumer, who's been working with Bernie on a sprawling $6 trillion reconciliation package that includes Medicare expansion and major climate investments. He said, quote, I think our members are, across the spectrum, but I realize that there will be a reconciliation bill, but not without a bipartisan infrastructure bill in hand. So evidently the conditions are the two bills are going to proceed together. That's good, except if there are too many giveaways in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. The privatization giveaways, the asset recycling giveaways. We don't know yet what those giveaways are. That's what we have to watch out for. We don't want to pass a bill that's going to further increase inequality in this country further. We can't have it. Asked when the public can expect a vote on the bipartisan deal in the House, but Nancy Pelosi responded, as soon as we see a reconciliation bill. And again, she said, we're not taking up the bill in the House until the Senate passes the bipartisan bill and the reconciliation bill. If there is no bipartisan bill, then we'll just go when the Senate passes the reconciliation bill. But I'm hopeful we will have the bipartisan bill. And Ilhan Omar, the whip for the nearly 100-member Congressional Progressive Caucus, welcomed the remarks by Pelosi and Schumer. Quote, it was always unlikely for many members to support a bipartisan bill on infrastructure without a guarantee on a bold reconciliation bill moving simultaneously. It's time to deliver big on behalf of our constituents. So there you have it. There is a move among progressives. Let's see if they stick with it, that they have to get things for their constituents now, and there will be nothing bipartisan if they don't get what they need for their constituents. They're preemptively rejecting any leadership promises to tackle the reconciliation bill at some later date. Such promises are not being respected on this occasion. I'm very glad to see that. They must stick with it. We don't have a lot of faith in, quote, I promise I'll do this, said Jayapal. It's unclear whether progressives in Congress would be willing to tank the bipartisan deal over objections to the proposed pay-fors, which have not yet been finalized, specifically the public-private partnerships and the asset recycling practices. That's being rejected at this point as thinly veiled attempts to hand public infrastructure over to corporations and Wall Street investors. It's good to see that. Let's hope they stick with it. And the Sunrise Movement is on their backs about this as well. So maybe they will stick with it. So, but that's my final word. Things seem to be moving forward. It remains to be seen how tough the progressives are going to be in terms of having the right pay-fors in the bipartisan bill, and also having the right ones in the reconciliation bill. What I don't understand is how they can avoid having a reconciliation bill that is a deficit, neutral bill that's required by the reconciliation process. Now, they might be able to play some game specify that trillion-dollar coins are going to pay for the infrastructure. But I don't think that under the reconciliation rules that they can increase the debt and have that kind of offset as a quote, pay for, unquote. Notice I have scare quotes around the pay for, because I know that generally speaking, the taxes and the bond revenue do not pay for anything. For that matter, the platinum coin doesn't pay for anything either, because Treasury doesn't actually spend the platinum coin. It would have to spend the actual additions to the Treasury spending account in the form of reserves newly created by the Federal Reserve. So, okay, even the platinum coin, okay, is not a pay-for. It's just a trigger for the Federal Reserve to create those reserves in the Treasury spending account, okay, that the Treasury can spend. It's the Treasury spending that is the actual pay-for. So, do I think that the bipartisan infrastructure bill will pass? Do I think that a reconciliation bill with a lot of good stuff in it, okay, is going to pass? Okay. I really don't know. That will depend on whether the Gang of 21 will stick together and will pass the bipartisan bill through the House and also through the Senate. So it's going to depend on that. Until the bipartisan bill passes the Senate, it's not even going to be taken up in the House. So the House won't pass it. Okay, if it doesn't pass, then the House will wait for the reconciliation bill to be passed. And if the bipartisan bill doesn't actually pass the Senate, then the reconciliation bill will be that much bigger because it will include what was to be the spending in the bipartisan bill. Will the Democrats actually pass the reconciliation bill? Well, that's going to depend again on Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. I presume if the Gang of 21 doesn't hold together and pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill in the Senate, I hope that Manchin and Sinema will feel properly chastised by that and will then be willing to say, okay, we'll be supporting the reconciliation bill. Because in the end, we need to have the infrastructure bill passed. And that's more important than having bipartisanship. And anyway, we did all we could to get the bipartisanship. And it was the Republicans in the Gang of 21 who would not, in the end, actually pass the bipartisan bill. Now, one also has to notice that if the bipartisan bill passes the Senate, it can only pass with the support of 10 people on the Democratic side. Manchin and Sinema don't have the 10 people themselves. 50 Republicans are not going to support the bipartisan bill. At most, they're going to be 11 Republicans in support of it. Since the bipartisan bill needs the 60 votes, they're going to need 49 votes from the Democrats, okay, in order to pass it. That means they're going to need people like Ed Markey and Bernie Sanders and Warren and Jeff Merkley and Sherrod Brown and all the others. So Manchin and Sinema are not going to get that kind of support without themselves committing to pass the reconciliation bill. I know they're saying now, well, we have to see the reconciliation bill first. So fine. You'll be able to see the reconciliation bill. And meanwhile, when your bipartisan bill gets to the House, Nancy Pelosi is going to hold it up until the reconciliation bill passes the Senate. She's already said she's going to do that. So Manchin and Sinema are going to have to cooperate, or their bipartisan bill is not going to be passed. Now that they worked so hard on the bipartisan bill, I don't think they're in a position to say no. If they don't like what's in the reconciliation bill, if they object, for example, if something like the $15 an hour minimum wage, okay, is imported in that, they can scream to high heaven about it. But if they don't vote for the reconciliation bill, they don't get their bipartisan. They don't get their proof that deals can be made in the Senate without getting rid of the filibuster. They need that proof. So there's going to be a tremendous amount of pressure on them to pass the reconciliation bill, regardless of what's in it. Regardless of what's in it. I hope the Democrats have the guts to put in the $15 an hour, the $15 an hour provision again. Because once the bipartisan bill passes the Senate, it seems to me Manchin and Sinema are committed to passing the reconciliation bill. They put themselves over a barrel this time, I think. Okay, I'll now consider your comments. Hope you liked that last bit of analysis. I did. Kay says share. Lana says happy Thursday. Evelyn says talking about things like a Dem senator said to me translates into all talk. Well, maybe so, but you got to cover the reactions to these bills. Evelyn says not more. And Ghost Start says Surfside collapse. I know that was in a condo in Florida. I'm still wallowing in the afterglow of last night's inspirational live stream. Back for more. Hi, Joe. Guests and friends, says Carmen Muniz. Holly Horn says, hello, Holly. I saw you this morning, too. By the way, I left a message for you in the comments. Okay, I left a link to the details about how they got their Medicare for All coverage in Libby, Montana. So I don't know if you've seen that yet, but if you haven't, you should. Kay says that maybe they should not go out of town. Holly Horn said they work so hard, but not. Actually, they do work hard. But what they work hard at is raising money. It isn't working hard at the legislation. Holly Horn says hello to Loris Pierce. Holly says hello, Lana. Holly smiles at Ghost Start. Kay says, I think that was a smile. Kay says they should all stay in D.C. until their jobs are done. And Ghost Start says double hello or double hi. I think that was double hello. And Carmen says, Joe, now there's Delta Plus. Yeah, I know there's Delta Plus. Okay, Delta Plus started in Scotland, okay, I believe. I don't know whether Delta Plus has gotten here yet. But this thing is evolving fast. And if we don't shut it down, not just with vaccines, but I think we still got to do social distancing. And when we go indoors and in closed spaces, we mask and we pursue contact tracing and testing for real. Anytime COVID pops up in any area, we say there's community spread. We got to shut that down. We act like the Australians and we shut it down till the community spread is stopped. Because Delta Plus has got to be crunched out. Delta has to be crunched out. Here in the United States, we cannot have that. Kay says infrastructure is a clusterfuck. Shake my head. Ghostdot says the vanilla ice creams and a traffic cone. Carmen says Glad Cinema is wearing bright colors. Yeah, you can see her. Hi, Holly and Steve. Yes, I saw that terrible partial building collapse. The Miami Beach building. Talk about crumbling infrastructure. Don't they have a building inspector in Miami? Carmen says Biden is so grateful for crumbs instead of saying how much better it would be if Republicans would stop cutting anything for the people. He's pandering to the enemy. I couldn't agree more. Brian Lacey says, what a cluster of links. Thank you, Brian. Ghostart said, I think it was on a compromised building list. Ghostart said, Surfside is the Miami metropolitan area's most Jewish community, but the majority of missing from the condo collapse are members of the same congregation. That's awful. Ghostart says, also missing several South Americans, including citizens of Chile, Venezuela, and Uruguay. Holly Horn says, tragic. Palata says, what is a compromised building list? There was knowledge of the situation Insurance will use that as an excuse not to pay any claim. What a cluster F. And Holly Horn says, same, okay, as Grenfell. Steve Wolfbrand says, hello at 9:34. And Kay says, hi, Steve Wolfbrand. Lana says, yes, Holly. Kay says, COVID funds need to stay put. Holly says, and I am dreading the Delta variant. How about the Delta Plus variant? Holly, if you don't have your vaccinations, get your vaccinations now. Quickly. Steve Wolfbrand says, hi, Kay. If anybody doesn't have their vaccinations, okay, at this point, be very careful until you've had the second one and you've got the full measure, okay, of the immunity they can give, because they work. And Kay says, yeah, Missouri's hospitals are already full of them. Now, you mean of Delta variant people? Holly Horn says, even people who've had only one dose will be vulnerable. Supposedly, only one dose will give you maybe 30% protection. Not much. Holly Horn says, yes, they have cut unemployment. Steve Wolfbrand said, our COVID numbers are creeping up a bit here. Yeah, but just a bit, I think, because I think they've been pretty good with respect to vaccinations, okay, in LA, okay, or at least my daughter seems to think that. Lana says, public-private, Joe Biden, neoliberal. There are already 2 Delta variants. Kay says, I'm a forever masker. Holly Horn says, exactly, Lana. Steve Wolfbrand says, John McAfee didn't kill himself. Steve Wolfbrand says, Gary Webb didn't kill himself. Steve says, Epstein didn't kill himself. Steve says, I doubt that chef guy killed himself. I'm sorry, chef guy? Which chef guy? If you're talking about Jack Chaplin, no, I don't think he killed himself. I think that was a triple bypass gone wrong. Steve Wolfbrand says a gas tax is a tax on the poor. Kay says we don't want toll roads either. Indiana did that under Pence, and very bad results. Yeah, we have a toll road here too. Now there's a private road that's going. It starts just before you get to Dulles. It's called the Dulles Freeway or something like that. As opposed to the Dulles Access Parkway. I forget what it's called. I think it's called the Dulles Toll Road. Okay, but anyway, it gets off Interstate 28 here. And it goes all the way to Leesburg, but through parts of Ashburn. Okay, and once we mistakenly tried it out and found it costs $5 to go 2 exits, and we said, we're never going on here again. That was the last time. Or that was 4 years ago. We made the mistake of getting on that thing. Yeah, McAfee tattooed that shit on his arm, laugh out loud. Sorry, what shit did he tax? Steve Wolfbrand said, okay, a gas tax is a tax on the poor. Yeah, it's a tax on the middle class too. Kay says, what is TIFIA? I think I went over that during the stream. And Ghost Start says the building had been sinking at an alarming rate, okay, of millimeters a year according to a 2020 study. So people stubbornly stayed there anyway. Oh my God, Steve, why didn't they evacuate the building when they discovered this? Unfortunately, this will happen again. Sad and criminal negligence. But Doc, we need your opinion on cryptocurrency. Okay, Steve, what do you want to know about cryptocurrency? Kay says, let the rich scream, laugh out loud. And Kay said, privatization is very bad practice. Biden promised no new taxes on people making less than 400K, but there might be some fees, laugh out loud. Oh yeah, toll road payments. Carmen Muniz when she was Stephanie Bell. Right, when she was Stephanie Bell. Exactly. Yes, that paper was by Stephanie Bell. Okay, I always have the link to it handy. If you want me to put it in the comments, I can easily put it in the comments. Steve Wolfbrand says, just tax the super wealthy. Geez, what are we waiting for? GoStart says, asset recycling. We will sell infrastructure to private owners who we think will repair it. Then when they don't because it's too expensive, we should all act deeply shocked when it collapses. GoStart says, the Surfside building scene was privately owned. It was judged unstable a year ago. Kay says, we need high-speed trains. We do. GoStart says, on an insider note, the QAnon fans thrilled after OAN host floats max execution for people who stole election from Trump. This was evidently an article that was run in alternate. Carmen Muniz says, woohoo, we have homework. Evelina says Congress is apparently stuck because it likes it that way by design. At this point, if something worthwhile passes, it will be by default. Kay says our government is pretty much worthless at this point. Evelina upon shake my head. I think hearing aids, yes, it was hearing, right? It was dental, hearing, and eyes. I think hearing aids was the third party. It was. And Lana says, Steve, mass execution, nuts. They're nuts, but they're dangerous because they're serious. Lana says, but Rachel Maddow isn't really entertaining in my opinion. But I like it. She is FOS. Okay, did you mean to say POS as opposed to FOS? Evelina says, sometimes I think every time a progressive Dem says I won't sign the bill if this is not in it, conservatives think, okay, let's make sure it isn't included, laugh out loud. I know, but so many of them are saying it now that it seems to be a collective thing. And if they don't stand firm on this, I mean, I think a lot of them are going to find that their funding is shut down. If they don't follow through on this, when they go for funding to people, they're going to simply get shut down. They will never get another contribution, okay, from any of us. They better deliver this time. They better have the gumption to say no when they don't get what we need from the powers that be. Evelina says, very short-sighted conservative politicians. It's not they're short-sighted, they're evil. Kay says, just call them cons, Evelina. They're cons. They are cons. Carmen says, do you mean progressives are demanding progress finally? Apparently. Evelina says, as in con artists, Contras, I'm going to laugh out loud. Kay says, exactly. Carmen says by the time they pass the bipartisan bill, everyone will be sick with COVID again and probably in overflowing hospitals. Okay, says still waiting on my latest bank statement to stay on the Medicaid program in Ohio. Shake my head. The harassment here in Ohio never ends. Ghostot says, I label literally everything for entertainment purposes only. Hashtag Kabuki. Did you spell Kabuki right, Ghostot? Ah, there it is. He says, Kabuki, yes. Kay says, sorry, Joe, but FB is cutting you off for me. I'm learning to hate Facebook. Yep. Okay. If I get the okay from all of you, I'm going to stop going to Facebook myself. I don't need to tie up one of my the 3 multi-streams with Facebook when you can all watch me on YouTube. Then I'll have room for a Rockfin stream, which I think I'd like to begin starting. Carmen says, yeah, I like the over-the-barrel analysis. I'll be using that. Kay says, well, Facebook cut me off, so thank you for a great discussion. Okay, I love you all. We love you too, Kay. We're sorry Facebook has cut you off. And even it says, Kay Clark Ryan, sorry about that. Join the club, not sure what's going on. Carmen says, it was sinking ground that collapsed the building. It's very common in Florida. I would never buy a home here. Even when it says no Cuban Americans in that building in Miami. Kay says, not sure about that. Can you believe Jill got booed in Tennessee because she stressed getting vaccinated? Unfathomable this late in the game. Evelina Ponce said Bourdain. Did Bourdain die from COVID? I wasn't aware of that. But Evelina said he was pretty lefty, wasn't he? I'm not sure that he was lefty. Ghostart said Anthony Bourdain. Evelina said, okay, much of Miami is built on sand. What they said in this case was that particular building was built on coral. It was built on coral, and the coral was getting weakened. Steve said, okay, that McAfee tattooed on his arm that he would never kill himself. Then he killed himself. Ghostart said, watch Startup on Netflix for crypto crash course. I don't think Steve is asking me for a crypto crash course. I think he's asking me for what I think about crypto. What I think about it depends on the cryptocurrency involved. I will say this. All the cryptocurrencies are commodities of one sort or another. Okay. So they have to be treated like the commodities that are bought and sold in markets. Those particular markets are very poorly regulated by the government. And so they're all highly volatile. That's what you have to know about them. Okay, and volatility means that you can make a fortune one day and you can lose a fortune the next day. I mean, it's a lot like playing poker. You have to know when to hold, know when to fold, know when to walk away, and know when to run. And that's very hard for people to know. Lana says, FOS, full of poop. Thank you, Lana. Oh, I thought she was a POS. I won't have to say what that is. Carmen says, okay, Mana went mad cow over Russiagate. I thought she was going to have an aneurysm for Hillary. Lana asked, but did you get my message? Read Stephanie's tweet with the deficit squawkers. Yes, I did, but I didn't have time to cover it in this particular episode. It was so full of the infrastructure squat. But I'm certainly going to look for that. I'll find it, and I'm going to check it out. I'm sure I'll be very entertained by it. Steve Wolfbrand says, by Evelina Pont, he had a dead man's file of corruption in government. But perhaps the files will come to light, but I doubt it. I hope they do. Perhaps he's arranged for them to come to light, perhaps by depositing them with WikiLeaks or something. Evelina says Steve Wolfbrand eventually, when he turned to just literally what? Is there an icon there that I missed? And Carmen says, sure, go to YouTube. You just can't share to people. Groups as well. Yeah, but you can't share. You can share generally to people. On YouTube, you can like, share, and subscribe. That's what they do, okay, on YouTube. Yeah, you can't share it to specific people. You can't share it to groups. That's true. Oh, to adjust by literally dust. Thank you, Evelina. Just literally dust. Lana says, Bourdain committed suicide. I see. Steve thinks Bourdain was murdered. Steve Wolfbrand said, Bourdain suicided. Evelina says, Dr. Joe, yes. Steve says, exactly. Evelina says, oh my God, that building was built on Coral. Yeah, that's what I heard. I heard that on the news today, somewhere. Okay, that it was built on some coral that was getting corrupted in some way by global warming effects. Ghostart said, these squawks, hilarious. And Carmen says, Steve is so tread carefully, Joe. He always does that to you. I don't mind having arguments with Steve. Don't you know by now? I love having arguments with Steve. Lana says, no problem. I just wanted you to see it. Haha. I will definitely see it. I just didn't have time to get there today. KRTD says, the video tomorrow morning, that's the video, the Morning Joe Firestone Rewind tomorrow morning at KRTD Media is about Ro Khanna's state-based universal healthcare plan. Strictly speaking, it's not a universal healthcare plan itself, but what it does is to enable states to develop. It supports them in developing their own universal healthcare plans, including Medicare for All plans, if they so desire. KRTD says, tune into KRTD tomorrow morning and see that. Yes, and notice for at least part of that time, I will be there monitoring your comments and questions, and I'll do everything I can to answer your comments, and questions. Because this is the morning, and what I do in the morning is I sit here and I go over news and things like that, and I will consider your comments as news, so I will pay attention to them. Lana says, I share YouTube videos all the time. Yeah, you can even share them to Facebook. Lana says, I think, okay, that McAfee was murdered. Chaos Ing says, will you accept the teachings of Dr. Whitney Banks? She is the foremost expert on MMT. She teaches how Texas has been using MMT for the last 85 years. Okay, I'm not going to answer that by Chaos Ing. While I acknowledge that I'm not the foremost expert, okay, on MMT, I happen to be pretty knowledgeable about MMT myself. I've been working with it now since the end of 2009 and the beginning of 2010. And I know a lot more about it than Dr. Whitney Banks, who I have never heard of before. So I'm not going to spend much time with you, Chaos Ing. And Lana says, my Florida friends told me much Florida bedrock or similar is coral. Yes. And Evelyn says, Steve is okay. He's not defending anyone. Yeah, I know Steve is okay. And Lana says, go to KRTD Media. Lana says, Evelina says, offending. Defending was a typo. He's certainly not offending me. Steve Wolfbrand says, well, there's Michelle, but I'm not going there tonight. Evelina laughs out loud. Okay, thank you, Steve, and thank you, everyone. I've come to the end of the threads now. And so I'll be saying good night. Okay, I won't be online tomorrow except in the morning for Morning Joe Firestone rewinds. And I will certainly be back on Saturday. And Chaos Eng says, I think you should consider the wise words of Professor Jonathan Wu in China. He's a China MMT guy. He's been doing MMT for the last year. Well, I'm not sure what you mean, but there may well be MMT people in China, okay, because Randy has spent some time in China, and at those meetings, he was teaching MMT to the Chinese folks, and I'm sure they've picked up quite a bit of it over there. I haven't encountered Jonathan Wu yet. I understand that he anglicized his name probably for professional purposes. But anyway, if you have some links to Jonathan Wu's work, then I'll be happy to look it up. Loris Pierce says, thank you and good night all. Steve Wolfbrand says, I love you guys. We can't agree on everything. That's certainly true, Steve. Steve leaves a bunch of hearts. Thank you, Steve. Lana says, good night, Irene, and everyone else. And Evelyn says, good night, all. And I thank you all for coming again. Steve says, Princess Diana was murdered. I'm not going to make a comment on that. Chaos Inc. says, good night. Also consider Jake M. Smith's work. If you cite anybody, please leave links, because nobody is going to go and look it up, right? If people are widely read, okay, in MMT, okay, as I am, okay, and the name that you have is strange to me, then I'm going to immediately assume that you're not really citing, okay, an MMTer. And I'm not going to take the trouble to look it up if you don't leave a link. I can tell within 4 sentences whether someone is an MMT writer or not. That's how long it takes to find that out. So, if you're trying to sow chaos here, my advice to you, chaos, would be to go somewhere else. Good night, all. I will see you on Saturday.